Welcome, system thinkers. You're watching The Question. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, and each week I invite a new co-host to join us and help facilitate a deep dive into design systems. This episode of The Question is sponsored by Zeroheight and Sparkbox, and we're so glad you're here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join me for this episode's deep dive. My name is Ben Callahan. I'm a design system researcher, writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. Most of all, I'm a curious guy. And that's precisely what led me to create The Question. Every week, a new co-host and I will ask you a few questions about a very specific design system-related topic. You'll have 48 hours to answer, and everyone who does is invited to join the deep dive. Each week is like a mini research project on a very niche design system topic, and this only works if we all stay in learning mode. Now, before I introduce my co-hosts for this week, I just want to say a big thank you to Zeroheight and Sparkbox for sponsoring this episode. Zeroheight is the end-to-end design system management platform, the place your team can document, deliver, measure, and evolve your design system. Book a demo or learn more about them at zeroheight.com. Sparkbox partners with complex organizations to create user-driven digital experiences, including world-class design systems. Learn more at sparkbox.com/thequestion. This week, I'm joined by my co-host, Jarvis Moore, to talk about the variety of ways organizations are structuring their design system teams. Jarvis is a senior design lead at Microsoft working on design systems. Let's jump in. This week's question was about team structure and team size. So basically, what I wanted to get at was how many folks are dedicated to your team, and then what role do you feel is most missing from your current team and why? And then I had a suspicion about one thing I wanted to test, which it actually turns out was the exact opposite. So I'll share that with you in a little bit, but that was the reason that I asked what your personal primary discipline is. So we got 146 folks signed up to receive that question on that Monday email, and we had 60 people respond over the course of 48 hours. If you want to, there's a link here to click out to see the actual raw data. So you can do that and you can do your own analysis on this. That would be wonderful if you have time to do that. In general, so I'll just walk through this real quick. I asked how many people were dedicated, and so we got lots of different answers. You can see the data here. And so we even had somebody with more than 30 folks on their team, on their design system team, which is that's a very large team. But you can see that about 60% were in this category here, from 2 to 4 or from 5 to 8. So that's and that's what, in a lot of the coaching and stuff that I do, that's a pretty normal team size. That's where I think a lot of organizations are sitting. But I actually don't want to disregard this 0, right? So there's a lot of folks out there still trying to operate their systems with almost no support in this way. So that's something I think we'll talk about. We'll see in some of the comments later. Jarvis, what did you think about this? Is this kind of what you expected, or?
Yeah, I know a lot of my experience has been in that like 2 to 8 range. So definitely feels on par. I know at Microsoft, if we're just looking at the design side, we fit pretty much in that. If you look at design and engineering, then it's more. But yeah, being here and being at LinkedIn have been the first places where I've seen like really robust teams of like 15 to 20 plus for design and engineering.
Got it. Very cool. So that's kind of an alignment too. I went ahead and made us a little spot. So I know we have the data already calculated from all 60 responses, but sometimes it's nice to put a name with who's in what scenario. So I thought it could be helpful if you want to drag out a sticky note from the bottom and place it in one of these columns that is sort of aligned with where your size is for your team. Bruce Wayne, that's just me showing you how to do it so we can take him out of there. But go ahead and do that if you have a moment and just type your name in there. And it would be awesome. Maybe even the organization, if you're willing to share that. No pressure there, but I think that'll be helpful to see, maybe there's a few other folks who are in the same boat as you. You can kind of have some conversations with those folks on the side if that's appropriate. Okay. So it's cool to see we're kind of getting the same distribution, which is good. But so I also asked, what role is most missing? What do you feel is most missing from your design system team? And I went through, that was an open text field. So I gave people the ability to just type out and kind of give some explanation around this. But I kind of went through all 60 of those and did my best to kind of categorize them. And that's what I'm showing here. So what we felt like we were missing most. And so Jarvis, what were your thoughts when you look through this?
Yeah. So I have a little bit of a different approach. I know I'm looking at, because I'm over the design side on my team. And so I'm looking at having different pillars that we fit the designers into. But one of the places that I would just love to have extra resourcing, which probably won't happen anytime soon, but I would love to have a design technologist, somebody who can help us build out custom tooling for the system. Because we're pretty good when it comes to having experience across design. But if we could have things that would just enhance that experience in Figma, help people with token usage, all kinds of different stuff, bring in some of the decision making and documentation into Figma a little bit better. I know I've seen a lot of companies that have been doing really, really great things in that space. So yeah, if I had that resources, that would be icing on the cake for us. Yeah.
There were quite a few folks who mentioned tokens in some capacity or another in the data, in the answer to this question. I think it's, that's an area where it's things are, they can be a little complex, in terms of one person feeling like they have to solve all those problems for people. And so I think there's a lot of people struggling with that side of things, feeling like they're doing that in a way that's robust and will scale. Because design systems work is you're making so many decisions and you're never quite sure if it's going to be the right decision down the road, as this really scales up. So I think there's some nervousness around that. We definitely saw the most people felt like they needed development resources. Product management was huge. That was and I think Jarvis, you felt like that was a surprise to you, right?
That did not see that one coming. I felt like development would be a big thing, and then probably design next, and then we would get some of the niche specialties within that later. Yeah. But product and project management, yeah, that one surprised me.
Those two together are that's way bigger than dev, So that's that's really an interesting observation. I didn't expect that either. I think and we'll see this in the quotes later, but it felt to me it's not that these teams don't have somebody doing that work. It's that oftentimes it's a designer or a developer who's kind of forced to do it because nobody else is doing it. And so that was an interesting balance where it's the effort is hey, we need a design system. Let's get a designer to do it. But that person realizes it's way bigger than just me jumping into Figma,
I'm lucky enough to have a PM on my team. And so knowing what they do, I would be terrible at it. So it's an invaluable resource for sure. And Ron, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a question on this point, which is to what extent do you guys and the rest of the group think that a product manager for a design system should or can be just the same as a product manager for every other customer-facing product team in the organization? Or does a product manager for a design system team need to have greater level of background knowledge or a different kind of skill set than your average product manager?
That's a great question, Ron. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking so I don't have an answer necessarily other than if somebody's going to be a product manager or a product owner over a product, they need to understand that domain, right? So, and I guess in my mind, that means systems thinking here. And so a lot of the things we talked about in the last couple of weeks actually around like the nuance between what does it mean to be a designer who's focused on systems versus a designer who's focused on product. Those are there's some different things that go in there. So maybe it's that same kind of spectrum. I don't know. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I'm kind of indifferent. I think that it's okay either way. I know because they're going to bring in a skill set that you don't have, it's kind of you'll build that bridge together so that they'll get some of the system knowledge, you'll get some of the PM knowledge. And so I think Emily is one of the PMs that I work with, so she can probably answer this better than me, but take it away, Emily.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, I don't know who asked that original question, but it's a really good one. My career has been predominantly in the product management space. And over the last year, I've been with Microsoft working in their design system. And it is a whole different ballgame. I have never worked with a design system before. It feels like a very different product than anything I've worked with in the past. So I think to Jarvis's point, like there's a level of skills that I can bring to the table that are irrelevant from the design system, right? It's just kind of that basic set of PM skills. But I am in constant learning mode with the design system as my product in this chapter of my career. So I think having both the basic kind of core PM skills, but then also having a PM with true design system or even just systems experience in general, gosh, that would be a powerhouse. And hopefully I'll be there someday. But yeah, it's an interesting space for sure. So great question.
Thanks, Ron, for getting that going. And if others have thoughts on that, there's spots over to the right. You can add some notes around that. We can even dive deeper into that as a specific topic later if we want. Other quick observations here, design ops was actually up there quite a bit. And that's something that I hear a lot of design systems teams talking about. And that gets to maybe some of what you were saying, Jarvis, too, about just like what's the glue between all of this? How are we moving our design decisions from conceptual things all the way into tokens, into code, systems to use those tokens into actual code, right? So a lot of times connecting those pieces is that design ops role, and even DevOps in some cases too. Content was also high on this list. That's number 3 in the list, which I think is fantastic, right? That we are starting to see the value that somebody who's dedicated to that role brings. And this was a combination of a lot of things. Some people said UX writer here. Some people were talking mostly about writing docs. And I combined all of that into folks who are, thinking about from like microcopy in the UI all the way through like writing actual documentation. So it is a combination of a couple different maybe perspectives on that. But that I found to be really exciting, actually. Any thoughts on that?
Also another place where I feel like I'm not the best person there, and it is always way better to have somebody with those skills.
Yeah.
And we have a content writer on my team, and so she is invaluable. Absolutely. Pleasure to work with, and takes so much of that burden off of my plate and the rest of the team's plate. So we can kind of focus on more of that typical system stuff and have that type of support is just really helpful. It's not that we can't do it. It's just we're a lot slower than she is.
Is she writing the docs for the components and the processes and all of that, or is she doing more like UI copy or UX copy?
The goal is for a little of both. It's historically been mostly the docs, but one of the things that I want to get to, and I can probably drop this in the resources, but Intuit has a content design resources site. I want to get to that level of detail with the way that we give guidance around content.
I see. So you're thinking of like how you could serve as subscribers through your system, how you could serve folks who are content focused. I love that. Yeah. I think that broadening out beyond just design and development as people who could be finding value in the system, I think that's huge, right? And then it gets into, and this may be for another question, but like once we start to have that broadening of understanding who could be users of the system, then we have to start to redefine what it means to adopt the system, right? Mm-hmm. If it's not like I have a piece of code I can include and you can easily track, well, how do we measure adoption of our UX writers, on the system? So what assets are we offering them? How do we actually track that? So that's maybe another day. We'll dive into that, but
maybe another question.
Yes, there you go. That third question I asked was just about your personal primary discipline. So in my coaching practice, I've been asking this and trying to understand what I often see is like folks who are design focused approach the system from that design perspective, of course, as we would expect. And a lot of times when I ask them about what their team structure needs to be, they're very focused on design because that's kind of the perspective from which they come to the systems work. I wondered if we would see a correlation here between so in this case, you can see we have mostly designers that have answered, but we have mostly development in terms of what we feel we need. So it was kind of the opposite of what I expected to see. Now, this isn't statistically significant. There's a small number of answers, but I just thought it might be interesting to see that. And also what this tells me is that we all have to do a better job of getting our peers who are of different disciplines to answer these questions, if that's all right. So next time we do one, maybe share it with someone who's not your same discipline and ask them to participate. That might give us a really kind of broader perspective on the data we're gathering. So, okay, so that's kind of like a summary of the data. If you have a moment, or maybe you've already been doing this, I pulled some quotes. They were sort of like, I don't know, it's always hard to do this, but I found kind of three themes, right? There was a lot of information from folks, even with people who have just smaller teams, who had this sort of like frustration with it doesn't feel like that we're being supported, like the lack of resources, the lack of team size means it feels like the leadership isn't really behind us. Things like we lost half of our development capacity in a reorg recently. Our tech partners have been reallocated. We have to ask for dev resources on every single thing. It's always a low priority on their roadmap, right? We're always overloaded with other projects. So there's a lot of sentiment there were a lot of this in these answers, that folks are feeling kind of like they've been a little bit abandoned, perhaps. And that led me to think, and if you're willing to do this, if you move to the right just a little over here, if you can hover this little gray box, it's a question that I'm asking now. This is just like a little bit of additional info. How many of you have seen the size of your dedicated design system people, the team, decrease in the last year? And if you press E, it'll bring this little thing up and you can vote. So you can add a thumbs up or a +1 or whatever there. So if your system team has been impacted by layoffs or not, that would be interesting to kind of see. And then, there were also, I don't have a lot of these quotes in here, but there were a handful of folks who were like, actually, our team's pretty good. We don't really need anybody. That was much more rare. But I am also interested to hear in a similar way, how many of you are currently growing that design system team? So if that's something that you're doing, I'd love to see a little note there too. And it's possible that both of these are true for you, right? Like that's kind of this weird scenario that we're in the industry right now, where things have been so up and down. So I think that'll be interesting as folks go through. Any thoughts on this little or no dedicated resources, comments? Anybody have additional sentiment to add to that?
The plague of design systems is that it can be hard to show the value in a monetary way. And so for a lot of higher level leadership and stakeholders, if it doesn't equal dollars in a way that they can see it, then it's really hard to justify the resources.
Yeah.
So that's been a struggle I've seen a lot. Yeah,
I feel that, man. And that's one of the things we try to help our clients with is right away, it's just understanding in the organization, where's the money, and how do we get close to the money in some capacity? If we don't have those folks, the ones who are bringing in the most revenue, the most profit, involved in the work, it's going to be really hard for it to be sustainable. I hate it that that's the case, but it's just kind of the reality at this point. So
one role that's not on the list, right? Maybe it goes into, you've dumped in the product or project management category, or perhaps one of the others, Scrum Master or other agile dedicated capabilities. So we're just in the position now of moving from more of a Kanban kind of model to trying to go into 2-week sprints, and I'm trying to upskill in maybe some of the more of the ways that Emily might already feel really confident in. But so that for me is a big learning curve, trying to adopt that methodology and spread it out to other team members who might not have worked there as well. But I'm curious if anybody does have a Scrum Master in their team at the moment. I know that one of the other design system teams in our overall group did, at least I don't know whether they still do, but they did have a dedicated Scrum Master.
Yeah, Ron, I think I remember that was in your answer, and I think I lumped that in with project management, I think is kind of where I put that. But you had listed it with a few other characteristics too. And so that wasn't an easy decision to make. Who has that role on their team now? No one has that? That's unusual.
We don't have dedicated Scrum, but our PMs kind of take on that responsibility.
Yeah. So I guess perhaps it's like we don't follow a very specific, capital A, agile, whatever, approach, but we have an iterative approach. And so I think maybe the generalized question is who has somebody that's like leading the estimation of work, prioritizing that work, and making sure that it's getting through to the right folks to do it. I'm sure most of you have somebody doing that, I would assume. Yeah. Okay. I see.
Seeing some thumbs up.
I'm with Ron. I had the learning curve. I came over from a traditional graphic design side, branding side, and joined the design system team and had to learn how to work in Scrum with sprints because they actually took our designers and put them with some developers. So we fell underneath the Scrum Master from the development side. And I think it's been extremely positive. It goes along with a lot of the stuff I've read online about Agile. It's about, breaking it down, like an iterative process. And so much about design system work is making sure it's right. It's not as fast as product design, but making sure Ben, you spoke to this earlier, like you have to make decisions that stick around for a long time. So making sure that works and you can live with that for a long time. And I thought that fit into a Scrum method really, really well. And of course, we went through and wrote up, and we have in our design system, we have 6 brands and we have a token system. So we have a whole leveling of projects built out, like a level scale of how many libraries are you going to touch? Do you have to adjust tokens? Are you renaming? Are you creating? And it breaks all that down. So it really makes us think about the ask up front first to actually level it. And I think that's been extremely positive. And then there are times where we have spikes where it's like, okay, we have no idea how we're going to do this yet. So we need to figure it out and then level it.
I actually love that in the most mature design systems that I've interacted with, they actually have this cadence of like real innovation built into the work, which is not typically something you're thinking about when you're thinking design system, right? You're thinking, let's create cohesion. Let's take all the work that's been done, but let's backside of the diamond. Let's bring it back in under control. But those teams actually, they have that, of course, but they're also using their time to think about what's coming down the road. They're looking ahead. They're looking even at like industry. How is the tech moving? How is the design tooling moving? And they're experimenting with things. So they're not surprised when some feature team somewhere is like, well, we're moving to Vue. Sorry, you don't have Vue components. We're out, so that it's that sort of proactive mentality, but that's a late stage maturity kind of mentality. And I think in Agile, that's what you just described, Brady, like a spike, like let's do a week's worth of work on this, right? We're not going to go a long time, but we're just going to test some ideas and see, is this a good direction, a good path for us to go? So I love that as a good model for finding a way to get some innovation into your system.
Love it too. I know one of the things that we're looking at doing to kind of have both the like forward thinking and the more bird's eye view, but still be able to break our projects down into those sprints with like reasonable chunks of work and a lot of my teams on here, we're doing project charters. We haven't started it yet, but that's something where we're looking at adding in that description, the overview, what's within scope, what's not in scope, who are the stakeholders, like defining all of that in a source of truth up front, and then breaking up that work into those sprint cadences so that we have both the high level, who we need to talk to, what our milestones are, and then actual like boots to the ground work getting done. And
like, I know for us, because we have a relatively small team, but like, it's finding the balance between creation, curation, and innovation. Like, where are we spreading our time and how we best serve all of our clients and subscribers. But being in the Scrum system really helps us kind of break that up. It was creation, curation, and innovation. Because I read there's another design system article where they said most design systems are curation because you're looking at what product designers do, and then you're kind of absorbing that and kind of supporting them and making sure all that stuff works. But then how much actual creation, new thinking comes out of the design system, and how much is actually curated, and you're just taking stuff that other people do and basically perfecting it, and then the innovation.
Hey everybody, there's still a lot of great content left in this episode, but let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
How much time are you spending wrangling all the aspects of your design system? Trying to create a unified experience with your UI libraries, your code resources, your design tokens? You need a platform that makes managing a design system easier, not a chore. So zeroheight is the design system management platform that centralizes everything, including your documentation. And this year, we've rolled out some game-changing features that make zeroheight even more powerful. First up, we have the adoption tab, which gives you real-time insights into how your design system is actually being used. So you can hook it up directly to your code repos and NPM packages, and it will not only make sure that everyone is using your latest packages, but it'll also give you insights into component usage as well. Finally, you can prove real design system ROI. And then there's our brand new API as well. In a few minutes, you can create your own Figma plugin or API chatbot to bring your documentation to the places that your team is actually searching for it. If you're looking to make design system management seamless and efficient, what are you waiting for? Try zeroheight for free today by heading to zeroheight.com and use the offer code QUESTION to get a free 90-day trial. That's zeroheight.com and the offer code is QUESTION. Enjoy the show.
For the last 16 years, Ben and I have both been business partners and friends in our company Sparkbox, which is always aimed to build a better web. In the beginning, that was two software engineers coming together believing there was a better way to do things. What Sparkbox evolved into is a complete team that includes user experience, design, engineering, and plenty of consulting and strategy. About 10 years ago, we dove headfirst into design systems, helping some of the world's largest companies and universities and even tons of small businesses to help realize the efficiency and promise of what design systems can bring. I continue to be in awe of what Ben learns and shares in this community. If you need strategic or tactical help with your design system, swing by sparkbox.com and reach out. We'd love to partner with you and your team. Have a great day. Enjoy the show.
So another theme was this sort of like lack of leadership, which I think, Jarvis, this kind of lines up with some of what we're just talking about, which is around like leading the team in terms of like very tactical, what should we be working on stuff, but also bigger picture things. You know, Michelle, who was our first co-host at Lululemon, talked about this idea of a single leader, right? And I think her background is like that's what she had at a previous place, and now where she's at, it's not like that. There's like more of collaborative leadership, and I think that can be great, but that can also be slow, you know. And so when a system is already kind of moving at a slower pace than the products around it, to also have to wait for consensus to be made just on simple things can be really hard. So I think that was something I sort of heard in some of these. No single person driving the work, making decisions. It's a collaborative volunteer effort. This one is just, man, I thought we might see more like this, but this statement, as implementation expands, support requests increase and more maintenance is required. And that, in my mind, is one of the biggest things that's lacking, right? So having a PM is helpful for that, but that doesn't get the actual requests answered. And so I wondered if we would see people saying we need customer support type roles on our design system team. That's something I think we're going to see more of as these teams mature into like full blown, design system programs that actually have to like genuinely support the people using them. Lead, organize, maintain, evolve, advocate, all of this all at once. You know, I think people, there's definitely like an overwhelming side to this, you know. So any thoughts on that sort of lack of leadership? Do you all find that as like leads or people working on systems, you have to kind of step up and do that stuff, or it doesn't get done? How's that happening for you? In
a previous design system I worked on, there was a design lead / product owner, and it was kind of a role that was both of them. It didn't get into the weeds of support requests or maybe Scrum. We actually had a Scrum master come in and help us with that, among other initiatives like accessibility. But I really like that kind of role because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about of a product owner who's maybe specialized in design system thinking. is that they kind of came in and they're aware of what design systems are, but maybe they're starting to learn. It's like the other way. They're actually learning about more product ownership and product management. I just found that role, I really liked that role because it was a blend of the two, and it felt really natural, because they could really talk about the design really deeply with stakeholders, but also work with the team on maybe component design or thinking about the system itself. So that's a position that I found to be really valuable. I kind of like that going forward, this design lead / product owner. I'm not really sure what it should be called, but to me, that was a single leader that we can actually point to, and they would really organize ceremonies and things like that.
I'm seeing some chatter in the chat around accessibility too. I do think there was like one or two folks who mentioned this in their answer in some capacity, Ron, but Daniel, can you speak a little bit, if you're willing to share, can you speak a little bit to how those roles are structured at CVS?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm one of the 5 accessibility folks in the design system, and we kind of have how like design and engineering split. That we tend to split it, and we kind of do the same with accessibility. So we have our inclusive designers, which I am, and then we have our accessibility engineers who work with the engineers, because they require kind of 2 different mindsets and knowledge. And so between the 5 of us, we have different platform specialties too, because we also understand with accessibility, you can't treat each platform the same. So I'm a web inclusive designer. We have iOS, we have Android, and that way we're kind of taking the specialist approach rather than the generalist approach with this stuff, to kind of create the best that we can, or the thing that we can at least.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. How cool to have the support to be able to have those roles across different platforms like that. Have you had to work in a scenario where you didn't quite have that same support? Like, have you been the generalist accessibility person on a team of a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing in that world?
We tend to always have that support, and the main thing being is our accessibility team. We realize the easiest way to increase accessibility maturity to the enterprise is the design system, and so we're constantly trying to invest in the design system because it's the main distributor of all components or best practices. So if we don't do it there, then we're just making it harder for ourselves.
Alyssa, what's up?
Yeah, I was one of those folks that mentioned accessibility in my question,
okay.
In my answer, because I'm kind of the lone wolf, like barking for accessibility, and I find that, and I'm a developer, so I'm not a designer, so I'm trying to like shadow that line, not trying to tell people how to do their job, but accessibility is really like a big thing in my previous job. And just simple things like even color contrast and stuff is like, it really starts at the root. And so as the one implementing the, component libraries and all that, it's sometimes figuring that balance between how do I maybe suggest, but also like, sometimes I have to implement things that I know aren't accessible, and it really hurts. It really, it's painful sometimes, but yeah, it's kind of a tricky balance when you're kind of the generalist that you're kind of speaking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's wild. And you're right. Like the earlier in the process we can have those conversations, right, the better. Having to fix stuff later is so expensive compared to just doing it right the first time,
Yeah. It's always the answer I always get is that's not really a priority right now. And it never really gets done, unfortunately. So I try to sneak things in as I implement, but I've been trying to
always bark up to the money tree there, because like when you look at the Targets of the world and things where they have gotten sued and like had to pay millions in these lawsuits, and then still take the time and money and resources to go and redo. That's always the button I try to push, is like, how can I show you that this can equate to a little bit of money now or a lot of money later?
Yeah. I think my company's smaller and they're trying to get more enterprise like clients. So I think that might be something I might try and pull, that like, as you go for larger corporations, that's going to be something, having certain, compliances are something that's going to be needed. So yeah, thank you for the tip.
Aaron, I see your comment in there too, that you've got accessibility specialists that are sitting outside of the system. So they're sort of working like kind of like horizontally across the org. Is that how that works? Or
yeah, that's correct. They sit in like a risk department, and so they review the design systems at design phase, and then development phase, and then our customer facing products are also required to actually put their features through accessibility as well, because we all know implementation can cause havoc on things as well.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear that. That's one of the things I love about design systems is you can kind of tell the story of a system uniquely to what it is that people care about. The systems help in so many different ways. And so accessibility is one example of that. And I think last week or the week before we talked about sustainability and how in the same way that a system can spread around good UX or good accessibility practices, it can do that with any good practice, So I think that's a good way to sell it, Awesome. So that sort of, lacking leadership is an area where I think we saw some consistency. I also definitely picked up on this idea of community and content. We talked a little bit about content, but there were a handful of folks who put in this idea of like, we need a dedicated resource to put behind our general communication strategy, an evangelist, no time to get the word out, right? Because we have too many other things going on, an educator and a trainer. There's not enough focus on the people who use the system. The team thinks creating components and documentation is enough. So like this is getting at the idea that like it's not enough to build something good. We also have to market it and sell it. And that's part of the job for a systems person, right?
Yes, this is the thing that I think is more important. Like one of the most important things about a system that nobody talks about is it doesn't matter if you build something if nobody knows about it or knows how to use it. So we have to be marketers and salespeople and like advocate for this thing and like keep people up to date because they're all in their own holes most of the time. Like they have very specific deadlines and requirements and different things. And so when we flip our switch from systems designers to general product designers, it's all about what's the fastest I can get this thing done so I can hit this deadline. It's not, is it accessible? Is it meeting the design system? Because if they can't find it quickly and easily, then they're just not going to use it. They're going to go do their own thing.
Yeah.
Not saying that everybody will, but in general. But yeah, if we're not in people's faces, then they're not going to use what we provide, no matter how valuable it is.
I pasted in this little diagram in the far right corner over on the notes section. It's called the cycle of healthy design system maturity. It's like the most simple thing in the world, right? But people don't think about it like this. Everybody's focused on evolving their systems. That's designing it, building it, all of that. But education and education meaning like what we're talking about, training people how to use it, telling them what it is, creating that, casting that vision. And engagement meaning we actually can't do this right unless we're learning from the people who will use it, right? So that's the two-way interaction. All of those three things, that's probably, I think it's equally important, right? So a third of the work is designing and building stuff. That means 2/3 is education and engagement. And we just leave that stuff on the table a lot of times. Michael, what's up?
Yeah, I just keep thinking about our conversation a couple of weeks ago of the difference between maybe a systems designer or a designer who works on a design system team and a product designer. And it's like when you, as a designer working on a design system, I'm almost picturing like 3 different skill sets or 3 different niche skills you have to start really thinking about. One being obviously systems design. Another is interaction design, but the third is like learning design, which is a whole nother type of niche that I think a lot of product designers and UX designers don't talk about, but it's like the cousin of UX is like learning design. And I know there's been some recent books about that, but I can't help but think about the principles that learning designers, I think I'm using the right term here, but the principles that they have of how do you accurately, or how do you do a good job of teaching to people, is that systems designers, design systems designers need those skills in addition to systems design, in addition to interaction design, in addition to being accessibility, at least awareness. You don't maybe have to be an expert if you have that support, but there's so many hats that a design system designer has to wear. I think it'd be really nice to think about all of those and how can a design systems designer upskill in those different verticals.
How does your company staff the product, right? So that's another way to think about this is like Well, we have, of course, all these roles. We're talking about, product designers. We got UX folks, research. We're doing software development, engineering practices. All of that is true, and we think about those roles on the system. But we're leaving out like the salespeople, the marketing team, the brand team. It's like all of that is the engine that's actually driving the product being purchased, right? And in our world, the purchase is adoption. And what are we doing to sort of sell it and market it and all of that? So I loved that statement. Somebody said we need our own communication strategy, and I think that's like very insightful. And there's a lot of work to do there yet. So
it's crazy that got brought up, because that was kind of my role when I was at LinkedIn, was how we were doing our education and training. And so we were building out like design systems, curriculums, and creating videos, running workshops, all of these types of things, and trying to think through the different ways that people consume information and learn information. So we wanted to have things that were written, things that you could listen to, things. Figma does their playgrounds when they release new features, and so we took that same approach to the design system and created interactive playgrounds. And so it is a lot, and it is definitely another layered skill that systems designers are, we're discovering that we need to have. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it is hard.
And for most of us, it's not really what we were trained to do, So
Yeah.
we're like, I think a lot of times we feel like we're stepping out of our area of expertise just because we know this is something that needs to be done. And that can be hard and discouraging sometimes too, Ron, I see you adding in a comment there around a gap. Do you want to share that a little bit, or?
Yeah, sure. Maybe this is something that a business analyst or something might do. We probably wouldn't sit within the design system team altogether, but that we kind of need in the organization more of. I have no idea just exactly who works in each of our squads in the different product areas and the different tribes that we're split into. So I'm trying to spend all this time putting together a metrics dashboard so that I can track adoption through engineering tools that can scrape code bases and see, are they using the design system? Are they on the latest version? How many, what range of our components are they using? There could be a tool to do that in Figma as well. But that falls at the first hurdle if you don't even know which code bases to scrape that information from and which teams are responsible for them. And there's such chaos and lack of a single place to actually understand who the teams are, that it becomes really hard to push anything out and drive any change strategically or systematically. You're just kind of left at that, okay, so we can do the documentation and the education and hope people will adopt it or unblock their challenges or raise their challenges to adoption with us. But we can't really do that proactively unless we map the territory. And that's not something that should be our job in the design system team, I don't think, but we're having to do it because nobody else in the organization is doing it.
So what else is on your mind? Another question that I had was this idea of like, if you've successfully grown your team, how have you done that? Because a lot of the question was focused on what do you need? So like, what other tools can we use to expand? Like what's working for you to grow your teams? I don't know if any of you have had success with that, but
I know one of the things that would help me is having those different pillars. So if I can say what they are, one of them is the core system. So like everything, foundations, design tokens, all of that stuff that's required. Then going into components, design tooling, education and communication, and documentation as like the 5 areas that we need to touch as design. And so I'm always looking for where the gaps are within those 5 pillars and where we might need to like upskill or get extra headcount or what that looks like for my team. So instead of just having a design team and being like, all right, like we have 5 UX designers, cool. I tried to break it down and get granular with the skill sets, like the subset of skills that we need within that.
Yeah, I think thinking that's a nice holistic approach, right? Like sketching out the ideal, like what is it that we need? What are the responsibilities we need to cover? And then how can we distribute those responsibilities and what roles would we need? And then it sort of, I guess, comes back to sort of your perspective on systems, right? Because some of the folks I work with have like a tiny pattern library, and that's really what they have. They don't have the scope of impact with something like that, but they also don't have the complexity, of like needing all this design ops, DevOps, like glue stuff. So I think that, that's an interesting model of like, how complex do we make our systems, and is the complexity worth it? So, I mean, some of these folks have, if we've got 30 people on a team or more, that's like there's a lot going on there, right? So, and I think that all of those are okay, actually, right? Like it's a scale, and depending on what your org needs, you don't have to do all of the things, How do you tease that apart? Jarvis, in Microsoft, how are you all balancing that complexity versus value kind of thing?
I don't know yet. We're going through like a big redesign, and I've only been on for a couple of months there, but it's we'll find out really soon. I know one of the things, I can speak to LinkedIn more than this, but we did have a really robust design team. Like we were like 20 deep with just designers. And so we were able to have, people dedicated to certain areas, though we would support across everything systems related. We were able to like dig in and focus in on an area and like become experts and really take the time to learn and upskill ourselves and find those areas of opportunities, because we had a lot of support. But that was the only place that I've been at that had that many designers solely dedicated to a design system.
There's an interesting question there posed by Aaron in the chat that's kind of related, which is pros and cons for teams that are made up of specialists, perhaps using the pillars you listed, Jarvis, versus generalists who are trying to do everything, So I don't know if anybody if you want to speak to your experience, or Aaron, if you want to jump in there.
I guess the reason I'm posing the question is like, we've been in a space where we have someone who's great at doing the design and spec creation, someone who builds the Figma library, someone who's great at the like documentation, which has been wonderful, like to have these like keenly skilled individuals. However, we're losing people left and right. And that means like there's an entire gap, like a whole pillar disappears from the team. So we've been kind of debating whether we need folks that actually can sort of maybe carry, say, a component from beginning to end versus like a handoff. So I'm just curious.
So with this like pillar approach that we're working to implement, everyone on the team is a generalist, but I feel like within being a generalist, you have areas where you're stronger and weaker. And so I'm trying to play to people's strengths and then help have like a secondary area where they can grow a weakness. So nobody just does one pillar. Everybody at least has two. And then we still work across the entire system, because workload is going to dictate what has to get done at a certain time. So I see it as more people who are looking at process, strategy, and like thought leadership in these areas, not necessarily solely dedicated to only doing that work.
Yeah, I like that approach. Other thoughts on pros and cons there? Ron, what you got?
I think certainly my view for the role of the content specialist that we're hiring, it's not their job to be the only one that delivers the content, but to facilitate the other people in the team to do it to the highest standard. Still want the individual product designers who are taking a component from start to finish to be able to contribute the lion's share of the content, but they can, the content specialists can still, massage the copy or make it more readable if that's not a particular core strength of the designer. And so I think, and likewise, if there's, say you one ambition that we have is to kind of generate more bite-sized content chunks to sort of evangelize helpful tips, so get them working with the designers to create content that could go in like an Instagram account or something, like a quick 5-second reel of how you configure a particular component that might be a bit tricky or something like that. I agree with Jarvis's idea about you want to get generalists, but then some people that lean into, say, the documentation or the training, and how can you how can you power them up?
Classic sort of organizational terms, a RACI chart would be helpful, right? Like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted and who's informed, that kind of model where it's like, okay, not everybody is responsible for everything, and not everybody's an expert even in everything, but who needs to know when certain things happen, who needs to be accountable to them happening, all of that kind of thing. So something like that could be helpful. Well, this is fantastic. I threw in another quote that I saw, Daniel, in the chat, this idea that the value of a design system is directly related to the size of the organization. I can imagine some scenarios where I might disagree with that, but that's probably going to have to be for another time. And we're reaching the end here. So major thanks to Jarvis. Man, really appreciate you being here and sharing your experience with us. So thank you, Jarvis. Well done. All right, everybody, that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much to Zeroheight and to Sparkbox for making it possible. And of course, thanks to all of you for staying in learning mode. I'll see you next week.